Alright, so this presentation covers women in European history through the Congress of Vienna. Now, you have to remember that the overarching theme of a woman's is that a woman's role from the perspective of society and what the political, social, and academic implications result from that. So, beginning in the Middle Ages, you have women who their only duty and their only obligation is to the domestic sphere. And the domestic sphere is to take care of their family, their duties to their husbands, and their responsibilities to their children. So you have a very family-centric duties, and you have the husband as a central figure. So women can either do that, they can get married, and then they can take care of their household, or they can take the veil, which is become a nun. So notable women during the Middle Ages, you have Joan of Arc, and what she did, like leading troops, completely broke the expectations for women during the time. So it was very influential. It really broke every realm that a woman was expected to be in. And then you have Queen Isabella, who unified Spain under one religion. She implemented crime and economic reform, and you really see the difference between her and the other queens that were ruling during the time, because when you think of the Middle Ages, when you think of the monarchs within the Middle Ages, you think of kings, and then you think of their wives who their only duty is to have children to sort of continue this royal line. But Queen Isabella, she was really a co-ruler. She was very influential. She actually made choices, made decisions, actually ruled. On to the Renaissance. The Renaissance was not very revolutionary in the way that society perceived women, but it did sort of expand one's mind and the flexibility of one's mind, because it was diverting from tradition. It was sort of it was making people realize that how things were did not mean that that was how it always should be. But the Italian Renaissance family was still characterized by a husband and husband-father central figure, because women were controlled by their fathers, and then they were handed off to a husband who they had little to no choice in, and they were controlled by them. And then you have a frequent childbearing rate. The mortality rate in both the mother and the child were just quite low. Or the mortality rate was quite high, actually. Sorry about that. And again, the woman's duties was to their household and to their husband. So notable woman during the Renaissance was Lucrezia Borgia. She was the daughter of Pope Alexander VI, which they're supposed to be celibate, whatever. She was very influential in the court of Milan, very well read, very well educated, which during the time was quite notable. Isabella d'Este, same thing. She was very well read. She was fluent in Greek and Latin. She would perform for her family in the court by dancing, singing, playing musical instruments. She married the Duke of Mantua and exercised control over the court. And when he was actually captured in battle, she continued to rule herself. And during that rule, she was a patron of the arts and encouraged economic stimulation within her region. And during that time, it was really incredible. And then you have Catherine de' Medici, who was sort of the queen regent during her time, during all three of her sons' rules, and actually played a hand in policy and decision-making. But what you have to remember is that the expectation for women today to be dignified, to be educated, to sort of be like a well-rounded person, it was completely groundbreaking for women to be that during this time. So when I say notable women during this time, it really is a woman who is well-read, who is well-educated, who goes beyond the expectations for her, which during the time was their only purpose was supposed to be like childbearing and taking care of the children. On to the Protestant Reformation. Much like the Renaissance, the Protestant Reformation sort of expanded the mind a little bit because it was diverting from tradition. It was diverting from what was previously seen as concrete, in this case, the Catholic religion. So the Protestant Reformation was actually really important in a women's rights for education, because women were beginning to be seen as a moral and spiritual sort of guide for their children, rather than just having the father be that. And in order for a woman to be able to have a child look up to them religiously, they would have to read the Bible. In order to read the Bible, they'd have to learn how to read. They'd have to sort of be able to be fluent in the vernacular, which during the time that was not the custom before. They did not have education. They were not well read. So now when we're beginning to be seen as responsible humans and individuals, and they were not completely under the control of their husband or pastor. Exemplified this was Katharina von Bora, who was an ex-nun, and she married Martin Luther, and she really sort of set the standard for what a pastor's wife was, which was dignified and individual. She was not necessarily a trailblazer, but she really exemplified the marginal shifts from a woman's place during the Protestant Reformation. Catherine Zell, she preached with her husband and continued to after his death, which during the time was not allowed at all. And she stood up for herself. She was outspoken. She was loyal to both her husband and to her faith. And during that time, it was pretty incredible. On to the Catholic Reformation, you have you see with like the Council of Trent, the Catholic faith still reaffirming how they view themselves in society, and that includes women, how they view women. So it was much more traditional in the Protestant Reformations. Monasteries were still an option for women. Women during the Catholic Reformation, the Protestant Reformation, they were still seen as weaker than man. They were still seen as more prone to give into the temptations and indulgences like lust and stuff like that. And this was actually played a main factor in the gender distinction in the witch hunts during the 16th century. But that's something else. So going on to notable women in the Catholic Reformation, you have Catherine of Aragon. She was not necessarily a very influential woman, but she did sort of play a big role in how the events unfolded, because she pushed Henry VIII to want the divorce, which inspired his actions that got the ball rolling to the Act of Supremacy when he just basically got this Catholic Reformation in action. She was also the daughter of Isabella and Ferdinand, and she was the mother of Mary I. It was just, she played a big part in how history unfolded during the time. On to Elizabeth I, she was a strong female leader. She put in a lot of reforms, especially religiously, even if they weren't entirely successful, and she really demanded the respect that a king would get in her place, which was very incredible during the time. And then you have Mary I. She was really the first big female leader of England, even if she wasn't super effective outside killing a bunch of Protestants. On to the Scientific Revolution. Scientific Revolution, it played the same part in society that it played in how society viewed women, because during the time of the Scientific Revolution, it took a while to actually shift the perspective of the general population, and it was the same for women. It was not necessarily revolutionary in how people viewed women, but a lot of remarkable women came out of the Scientific Revolution along with their ideas. Women such as Margaret Cavendish, she was the Duchess of Newcastle. She was just very intelligent, very well read. She took part in a lot of scientific debates. She was a writer of romance, poetry, essays, plays. She was a philosopher. She had one of the earliest forms of science fiction, and she published a lot of groundbreaking works on natural philosophies, which during the time was just incredible. She was successful despite her gender and how society perceived her gender. The same for Maria Kirsch. She was a German astronomer, and she wrote on the conjunctions of the sun with Saturn, Venus, and Jupiter, and it was the same thing. She demanded respect despite her gender and how society viewed her gender, and she actually got that respect during her life. Amélie du Châtelet is actually my favorite. She was brilliant. She knew 7 languages by the age of 12. She earned her respect as a physicist translating Newton's work, and then she moved into Descartes, which got her into philosophy. She had a 10-year-long affair with Voltaire, who was just one of the main philosophes. And she actually dressed up as a man so she could partake in discussions. So the Scientific Revolution, while not necessarily revolutionary in how society perceived women, it bred a lot of incredible women and gave them the opportunity to sort of show that women had more than just their wombs in terms of bearing children. All right, on to the Age of Enlightenment. My paper. So the Age of Enlightenment had a huge sort of emphasis on rationality. So women began rationally and objectively contemplating their role in society, and that meant, why are we inferior? Like, why can't we have full rights to education? Why can't we have full rights to political and social spheres like that, even though they wouldn't really demand those rights until the French Revolution, it was still very incredible at the time. You had a lot of philosophers who shaped society's views of women during the time, because you had people like Montesquieu who were sympathetic to women's rights but still believed that men should be the central authority. And this means that the traditional beliefs prevailed, and that is the overarching sort of result of the Age of Enlightenment, is that people opened their mind to the possibility of women's rights, but traditional beliefs still prevailed. Women were still weaker, they still had their duties to the household, um, and men were still the social authority. And you see that with like Rousseau and Diderot, who just sort of bashed women, um, such as that. And so it wasn't necessarily revolutionary in terms of how society viewed women, but you do have a lot of notable women coming out of it, such as Mary Wollstonecraft. She maintained that women should have their traditional place in the family, but they should receive a formal education. This is something that you have to remember, is that women's rights during this time centered around a woman's rights to education, not politically or socially. Um, and she was seen as the mother of modern feminism. And then you have someone like Marie-Therese Joffrin. She held at some of the most highly regarded salons, attentive listener, generous with wealth, very intuitive. And then you have Catherine the Great, who was an enlightened ruler. She had a strong hand in her rule and her Joseph II's rule. She expanded and modernized Russia. On to the French Revolution. The French Revolution was really the first time that women demanded full political and social rights. Um, and so pre-revolution's women's place was at home and away from political or social affairs, but during the revolution, women began participating in political clubs and activism, which you see in the Women's Right March on Versailles, and women began defying what was believed to be their place, and that was inside domestic spheres. So you see them branching out politically and socially. Notable women from the French Revolution, you have Marie-Jeanne Cartier and Marquise de Condorcet. They were the first to actually publicly publish that women should have full economic and social rights, political and social rights, which was quite groundbreaking at the time. You have Aline de Gauche, who published the Declaration of Rights of Women, which was just sort of exemplifying how women were sort of left out of the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen. And then you have the Society of Revolutionary Republican Women, which was instituted in 1793. So it was actually after the revolution, but it was just trying to get the ball rolling for women in the future. But it was actually shut down by the government because they sort of accidentally aligned themselves against the government. But the fact that it was established is still very incredible. Onto the Napoleonic era, the Napoleon Code really emphasized male equality. So women's independence was undermined because men had complete property and monetary rights. So the code really made achieving full equality further away because women were still seen as sort of needing a man to do anything. A notable woman was Josephine. She was just very subtly influential because, Napoleon was completely in love with her, and she was a mistress to a lot of other influential politicians. So in this way, she very indirectly influenced history during the time. And then you have someone like Germaine de Stael. She was a woman of letters. She was a heavy critic of Napoleon. She was an author, hosted salons. She was really the epitome of European culture at the time. A romantic theorist. She was brilliant. And during that time, to have someone so outspoken and intelligent was just, it was notable. The Industrial Revolution, it was really like a standstill because nothing really happened for women's rights, and life for women was it was characterized by long, laborious hours, and education and families suffered because of that, because they had to keep working towards this paycheck and keep working towards work, basically. Their conditions were unsafe, sanitary, very long hours, very just laborious, so there wasn't much political or social outreach during the time. But during the Industrial Revolution, women were working, which hadn't been seen previously, to the extent that it was during the Industrial Revolution. That's about it for women throughout history. Okay.